Welcome to Weekly News Highlights, where we wrap up your week with a glimpse back into what went on over the past week. I'm Kim Dami in Seoul. The trainee doctors in South Korea left their work and patients behind in protest against the medical school enrollment quota hike. After multiple rounds of warnings, the government pressed ahead with taking steps to suspend their licenses, and nurses have started to take on doctors' duties. Consumer price growth in Korea was back up to over 3% last month because of higher prices of fruits among agricultural items. The stage is set in American presidential politics for a rematch between U.S. President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump, with former UN ambassador and Republican Nikki Haley ending her White House campaign. President Yoon Suk Yeol says investments in young people give the best bang for the buck. To empower young people, national scholarship programs and tax breaks for childbirth incentives will be expanded. Our Kim Do-yeon starts us off.
The South Korean government is expanding its national scholarship program so that 1.5 million college students will be eligible, up from the current 1 million. That's more than half of slightly more than 2 million enrolled college students. The announcement came as President Yoon Suk Yeol held a policy discussion in the city of Gwangmyeong in Gyeonggi-do province on empowering young people.
먼저 청년들이 희망을 가질 수 있어야 나라의 미래도 열어갈 수 있습니다. 청년들이 걱정 없이 공부하고 일하며 꿈을 키우고 미래를 준비할 수 있도록 하겠습니다.
In addition, work-study programs will expand. By 2025, 200,000 students will be able to participate. And a new quote housing scholarship will provide students with up to 2,400,000 Korean won annually. That's about $1,800 US. The government will also open up the Youth Leap account to more people. The savings account is for 19 to 34-year-olds earning up to 60 million won or around $46,000, allowing savings of up to $38,000 after 5 years with an interest rate of 6%. The income limit will increase to include more people.
그야말로 재정 투자를 했을 때 투자 효과가 엄청나게 큰 겁니다. 그야말로 청년들에 대한 이런 약간의 투자는 그야말로 돈 되는 장사다 이 말입니다.
President Yoon also emphasized direct involvement of young people in shaping government policy, saying they're able to see the world fairly and just. Meanwhile, it wasn't just about the opportunities, but it was also about the struggles, including single mothers struggling to receive child support from their former husbands.
Especially if the introduction of the advance payment system is introduced, the state will pay child support up front and then ensures that it be collected from the non-custodial parent. I believe it's important to instill a sense of responsibility in non-custodial parents towards their children.
This was President Yoon's pledge during the campaign, and an official from the Ministry of Family answered that relevant ministries are shaping practical measures to make this possible by the second half of next year. Also at the discussion, the government announced that it will not be taxing the childbirth incentives being given by private companies. This is an ongoing effort by the private sector to tackle the current low birth rate. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
The medical system here in South Korea has been in crisis for over 2 weeks now, as the junior doctors continue refusing to return to duty over the medical school quota hike. Now, steps to suspend their licenses are in full swing, and we saw President Yoon Suk Yeol himself addressing the crisis earlier this week. We have our top office correspondent Oh Soo-young to talk about more about the latest situation. Welcome, Soo-young.
Hi, Tammy. It's great to be here.
So, Soo-young, for our viewers, let's do a recap of what's been going on. What are the main arguments between the government and the junior doctors?
Right, well, starting with the government, the administration would like to increase the number of medical school students admitted each year to universities in order to address the severe shortage of doctors in hospitals throughout the country, particularly in regions outside Seoul, as many flock to the capital to get quality healthcare. And now, of course, there are many hospitals in Seoul, but that's still a lot of patients for a limited number of doctors who say they are also underpaid, as essential medical services are partially subsidized by the national healthcare insurance. That's why we've been seeing more and more medical school graduates setting up cosmetic surgeries and going into areas like dermatology. For instance, that's some of the examples, as they're non-essential services, and that means they can charge whatever price they like. So to increase access to quality healthcare, particularly to address the rapidly aging population, which will require many specialists in areas like neurosurgery, the government says it will expand the number of additional students to medical schools by 2,000 next year to reach 10,000 by 2035. Now, this has been met with fierce opposition among trainee doctors who have flat out rejected the number. The first and foremost reason being that they believe the number of doctors are already substantial. They think there are already enough qualified doctors. Also, they're raising an issue with the quota of medical school students entering universities, saying that it's going to lower the quality of education if the number is inflated. They're calling on the government instead to address the compensation system for doctors to be paid more for essential services, and also to improve protection measures against lawsuits. But the government is standing firm on adding 2,000 students as the bare minimum. According to data from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, South Korea falls below the average 3.7 doctors per 1,000 people, only having 2.6 doctors per 1,000 people. Also, South Korea has an average 77 medical students per university, comparing to countries like Germany or Britain, which have over 220 medical students per school. In fact, on Thursday, the Education Ministry said that 40 universities with medical schools, including Seoul National University, they've applied to enroll 3,401 extra students for the academic year of 2025. So that actually tops the government's target number, clearly showing that there's room and demand for medical trainees in the country, more medical trainees in the country. But that, of course, that hasn't gone down very well with the junior doctors.
Well, regardless of all these facts, though, neither side is budging.
That's right, Tammy. So without a clear middle ground, or any middle ground really, by Wednesday, over 11,200 doctors had not reported for duty, accounting for 91% of all junior doctors at 100 teaching universities in South Korea. Also, around 90% of prospective interns at major hospitals in Seoul, who were supposed to start earlier this week, reportedly withdrew from signing their training contracts. Around half of the surgeries scheduled at some major hospitals now have been cancelled since last week, according to the Health Ministry. Now, in the past, the government had always backed down when doctors rose up in fear of such a medical crisis. For instance, in 2000, doctors went on strike to protest the creation of a division of medicine in schools, which resulted in the government actually cutting the number of medical students by 351. In 2020, attempts to restore the capacity, that was met with similar collective action by medical students amid the height of the coronavirus outbreak. So this time round, the government is adamant that the country can no longer wait for reform, and it's not going to accept any illegal collective action, as under the South Korean law, doctors aren't allowed to go on strikes.
And as long as the standoff stretches on, public health is in crisis mode. And it seems like the president himself tried to break the impasse, right?
That's right, Tammy. So as the illegal collective action approaches its third week, it seemed that the president himself, he felt that enough was enough after hearing about ambulances not being able to find emergency wards, surgeries being delayed or even cancelled, and all these unnecessary deaths. President Yoon on Wednesday deemed the collective action a dereliction of duty by the doctors. He said that the government will not tolerate actions that violate people's right to life and health under the Korean constitution.
의사들의 집단 행동은 스스로 책무를 져버리는 일이며 자유주의와 법치주의의 근간을 흔드는 것입니다. 국민의 생명을 볼모로 하는 불법적인 집단 행동에는 법과 원칙에 따라 엄중히 대응할 수밖에 없습니다.
Yoon said, as the state is constitutionally obliged to protect the lives and health of its citizens, doctors are licensed to carry out this important public duty. He rejected claims that suspending medical licenses for an estimated 7,000 partaking in the strike infringes on their rights.
국가가 의사에게 면허를 부여하고 법에 따라 엄격하게 관리하는 것은 국민의 생명과 건강을 보호하기 위한 일입니다. 그러기에 의사의 자유와 권리에는 책임이 따르는 것입니다. 국민의 생명권을 침해하는 불법적인 집단 행동은 절대 허용될 수 없습니다.
So all these suspension measures, what happens to the doctors?
Well, obviously it means that they can't practice medicine during the time of their suspension, and the duration of the suspension, that could set back the time that they are able to qualify for their specialist certification. So it could take longer and delay career advancement, of course. Now that's if they want to go back to work. If that's not the case, then that could lead to more serious repercussions.
If they continue to defy the government and do not return to their workplace, and also do not treat patients, they can actually be prosecuted as a result. And if they are found guilty of a criminal offense that ends up in a prison sentence, even if it's a suspended sentence, they could actually have their licenses revoked, not just suspended, which means that they will be without a license and they wouldn't be able to practice at all.
Well, in the meantime, what are some of the measures being carried out?
Well, a couple of things, Tammy. So the government's number one goal really is to stabilise the system, keep emergency care and essential services operating. Measures include increasing the roles of nurses to support emergency care, including carrying out CPR and injecting medication. Military hospitals, they'll also be deployed, and also the government is going to support labour costs involved in hiring extra personnel. Also, the so-called Big Five, or the 5 major hospitals in the country, they're going to focus on treating seriously ill patients, while the local general hospitals, they'll take the role of tending to those in less critical conditions. Now, to help support these efforts, the government has set aside some $96 million in contingency funds.
Well, another interesting point is the role of the nurses. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, very interesting indeed. So from Friday, professional and designated nurses, they can temporarily perform CPR or administer emergency medication in emergency situations. Some can even draft medical records, requests for transfer of hospitals, surgical consent and prescribed medication, which can only be done by doctors under law. In particular, thousands of physicians' assistants or PA nurses, they've for years been carrying out substantial tasks in the operation rooms due to the shortage of doctors. However, Doctors Group they've been opposing having these PAs, nurses' roles officially recognised, as this could potentially mean competition if they set up their own clinics, for instance. Thus, mobilising designated nurses under the government's emergency guidelines, that could potentially lead to change as part of an overall medical reform that the Yoon administration believes is sorely needed. President Yoon himself on Wednesday said that the government will carry out fundamental reforms of the medical delivery system, changing the staffing structure and actively utilising nurses like these PA nurses.
Well, we'll have to see where things lead for now, but a breakthrough is very much needed.
Yes, I agree, Tammy.
All right, Soo-young, thank you so much for the report today.
Thanks so much.
South Korea and the U.S. have named their own chief negotiators for the allies' next round of defense cost-sharing talks. Now, negotiations are likely to start unusually early as the current agreement is effective for 2 more years. Our foreign affairs correspondent Peunji explains why.
South Korea has appointed a veteran diplomat as the chief negotiator for a new round of talks on defense cost-sharing with the U.S. Lee Tae-woo, who previously served as the consul general in Sydney, will lead the country's delegation consisting of relevant authorities from the ministries of Foreign Affairs, Defense, and Finance. The team will hold talks with a U.S. delegation led by Linda Specht, a senior advisor and U.S. lead negotiator for security agreements at the State Department.
I feel the heavy weight on my shoulders, but I will do my best to ensure that a rational level of defence cost sharing is achieved to provide a stable stationing environment for the deployment of US forces Korea, an essential element of combined defence posture between South Korea and the US.
Since 1991, South Korea has been shouldering the cost needed for U.S. troops to be stationed in Korea, including labor, logistics, and construction costs. The two countries have regularly held talks on how to share these costs, and the upcoming talks will be the 12th. The most recent deal was signed in 2021 and will be effective until the end of next year. With almost 2 years left before it expires, it's unusual for the two countries to begin negotiations again. This is widely seen as a move aimed at reaching an agreement before the possible re-election of former U.S. President Donald Trump, who during his presidency had accused South Korea of free riding, demanding it pay as much as $5 billion a year. But the foreign ministry has denied the speculation, saying early preparation has nothing to do with the election in November.
There have been cases in the past where defense cost-sharing talks took a considerable amount of time. Considering these circumstances, a representative has been appointed to allow sufficient time before the next round of negotiations.
More than 28,000 American troops are currently stationed in South Korea as part of efforts to deter North Korea's nuclear threat and to strengthen combined readiness. 배은지, Arirang News.
North Korea is opening its doors to the UN as well as Western diplomats, possibly to diversify its diplomatic contact channels. After nearly 4 years of isolation due to the COVID-19 pandemic, North Korea is finally allowing the UN to send their resident coordinator back to Pyongyang. Joe Colombano of Italy has been appointed as a resident coordinator to the north. Pyongyang has already approved this, and Colombano, who is working remotely from UN offices in Bangkok, is expected to head to the north shortly. Early last week, the Chinese embassy in Pyongyang announced that a German diplomat in charge of East Asia affairs visited the north. This was the first time a Western diplomat visited Pyongyang since the north closed its borders due to the pandemic, when most diplomats returned to their home countries. A senior official from the Unification Ministry told reporters on Tuesday that Seoul welcomes actions by the reclusive regime to open its doors to Western countries. Because until now, Pyongyang has been heightening exchanges with only a handful of countries, including Russia and China, isolating itself from the rest of the world. Now, experts say South Korea's recent establishment of diplomatic ties with Cuba may have also had some kind of impact on Pyongyang's actions to expand its diplomatic channels. For the first time in nearly 70 years, the U.S. will have a presidential rematch. U.S. Republican presidential candidate nominee Nikki Haley is no longer in the race. Losing more than 20 other contests to Republican presidential frontrunner Donald Trump, Haley's exit has cleared the stage for a Trump-Biden rematch in November's election.
It looks like the Biden-Trump November rematch is going to happen. On so-called Super Tuesday, when the largest number of primaries and caucuses took place across America, U.S. President Joe Biden and his predecessor Donald Trump both dominated the results, all but cementing a November rematch. Biden and Trump each had landslide wins in California, Texas, Alabama, Maine, Oklahoma, Virginia, North Carolina, Minnesota, Tennessee, Colorado, Arkansas, and Massachusetts. Former President Donald Trump celebrated Tuesday's wins at his Mar-a-Lago estate, which was crowded with his supporters.
Well, thank you very much. They call it Super Tuesday for a reason. This is a big one.
He then went on to criticize President Biden over illegal immigration across the U.S.-Mexico border.
And we're going to close our borders. We're going to have to deport a lot of people, a lot of bad people, because our countries can't live like this. Our cities.
President Joe Biden didn't give a speech, but instead released a statement saying Tuesday's results leave, quote, the American people with a clear choice. Are we going to keep moving forward, or will we allow Donald Trump to drag us backwards into the chaos, division, and darkness that defined his term in office? Biden added Trump was, quote, driven by grievance and grift, focused on his own revenge and retribution, not the American people. This Tuesday, voters in 16 states and 1 territory chose who they want to run for president. It's traditionally the biggest day in the U.S. for primary elections and caucuses before the actual election day, which is why it's called Super Tuesday. The day's results usually get a lot of attention as they give a clear indication of who will become the presidential candidate for their respective parties. Kim Jung-sil, Arirang News.
France has become the first country in the world to enshrine women's rights to have an abortion in its constitution. And despite an ongoing movement looking to roll back abortion rights in the U.S. as well as opposition from the Vatican, French President Emmanuel Macron called the amendment a message to the world. Lee Seung-ja has more.
The French Parliament on Monday approved a constitutional amendment that stipulates women's freedom to have an abortion, making France the first country in the world to do so. Parliamentarians voted on the constitutional amendment at the Palace of Versailles, passing it with an overwhelming support of 780 in favor and 72 against. The French Constitution will now guarantee a woman's freedom to voluntarily terminate a pregnancy. France's decision to make abortion a constitutional right is in stark contrast to the situation in the United States and an ongoing movement there to roll back abortion rights. In 2022, the U.S. Supreme Court abolished the landmark Roe v. Wade decision, which allowed abortions at up to 24 weeks of pregnancy, effectively banning abortion in the country. While several other countries around the world have included reproductive rights in their constitutions, France is the first to explicitly state that an abortion will be guaranteed as a right. Polls showed around 85% of the public supported amending the Constitution to protect the right to an abortion in a country where abortion has been legal since 1975. Following the vote in Parliament, President Emmanuel Macron said the decision was a source of pride for France and a message to the world. He also announced that he would celebrate International Women's Day on the 8th by publicly recognizing the National Day of the Constitution. The decision was met with cheers from abortion rights supporters, while the Eiffel Tower was lit up displaying a message translating as "My body, my choice." Right before the vote, the Vatican expressed its opposition in a statement, saying there is no right to take a life. Watchers believe the latest decision by France could pave the way for other countries to guarantee the right to abortion in their constitutions. Lee Seung-ja, Arirang News.
South Korea saw its inflation speed up last month, once again climbing over the 3% mark and breaking a downward trend since last October, mainly driven by higher prices for fruits. Our Park Kwon-woo has this report.
Consumer prices in South Korea once again rose by over 3% on year last month, mainly due to higher prices for agricultural products and unstable oil prices. According to data released by Statistics Korea on Wednesday, the country's consumer price index, a key gauge of inflation, rose 3.1% in February compared to the same month a year ago. Consumer prices reached 3.8% on year in October. That was followed by consecutive monthly decreases until last month's jump. Prices for agricultural products, energy, industrial products, and services were all up on year in February, with agricultural products and energy mainly driving the overall increase, rising 11.4% and 4.9% respectively. And with consumer prices remaining high, Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok spoke about ways to tackle the issue at an economic meeting held with related ministers on Wednesday morning.
The government will do its very best to bring consumer prices to the 2% range as soon as possible by taking the recent rise seriously.
He said the government will provide 60 billion won, or roughly $45 million worth of support for discounts on agricultural, livestock, and fishery products in March and April, dropping the price of major food items including apples and pears by 40 to 50%, lowering tariffs on imported fruit, monitoring prices by item daily, and continuing inspections at gas stations were other ways he said would be used to address the situation. While saying ingredient prices have dropped by about half compared to highs seen in 2022, he added companies should lower the prices of products accordingly, just as they did to raise them when ingredient prices got higher. Park Kwon-woo, Arirang News.
South Korea is still struggling with high food prices. Household disposable income in South Korea last year saw a smaller on-year rate of increase than that of the hiking food prices. This means South Korean consumers have had to adapt to survive due to soaring inflation, and retailers have had to change their sales strategies accordingly. Our An Sung-jin discusses how consumers deal with rising food prices.
Consumers in South Korea are adopting a variety of strategies to ensure they spend wisely amid rising consumer prices. According to Statistics Korea, the increase in the price of groceries up to January remained in the 6% range for the fourth consecutive month compared to the year before. As more people look for ways to save on living costs, retail industries have also been catering to demand.
Convenience stores such as this one are following large retail stores and starting to sell own brand products, hoping to appeal to price-conscious consumers.
This convenience store saw its own brand products on top across multiple produce categories. For example, an own brand pack of eggs here is 45% cheaper than other brands and is the most bought as well. And some own brand products are as much as 60% cheaper than other brands.
Since large supermarkets are no longer as cheap, I go to convenience stores that are nearby. If snacks or drinks have the same ingredients, I tend to buy own brand products since they are cheaper.
Data from the Korea Chamber of Commerce noted that South Korea's own brand product industry saw an on-year rise of 11.8% from the fourth quarter of 2022 to the third quarter of 2023.
One way consumers have started saving money is by buying own brand products, which are cheaper but also reliable as they come from well-known retail stores. Own brand products in advanced countries already make up a large portion of grocery items.
Soaring grocery prices are mostly driven by surging fruit prices, which saw a drop in supply due to abnormal weather conditions. Fruit prices soared 26.9% in January, which is the biggest jump since January 2011. As a result, consumers are looking at other ways of getting fruit. According to Korea's Customs Service, frozen fruit imports hit a record high last year. This retail store saw an increase of 119% in 2023 compared to the year before.
I usually buy frozen strawberries or blueberries because they last longer and I can use them in juices. I also buy apples that have scratches at a cheaper price.
Though the government has been making plans to address soaring grocery prices, including reducing tariffs on imported fruit, consumers will continue to find ways to spend wisely while prices remain high. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
That is all we have for this week. We thank you for watching Weekly News Highlights. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.